Okay, with this we only have 6 range specs left. I'm gonna go over 4 of them here and leave 2 left to join the last mini spec in the Hall of Shame video. The 4 specs I will be going over now are going to be comprised of 2 specs that have received some pretty good changes, pretty positive changes, and also possibly changed their playstyle, or certainly changed their playstyle in a couple of cases, and then 2 other specs that are way more similar to their BFA version. If you have watched all of these videos about DPS spec, you're pretty on point right now, recognizing that Blizzard hasn't really changed many specs from BFA to Shadowlands in their damage profile, in the way they do damage. We haven't seen any huge turnovers from a single target spec being turned into an AoE specs. There are a couple of possible cases, there are some improvements here and there in some damage profiles, but overall Blizzard seems to have laid it safe and not changed too much from one expansion to the next. So let's start with our first range spec. So we start with Affliction Warlock. Affliction Warlock is also one of the interesting new change specs coming into Shadowlands, because as I mentioned in the intro, not many specs are getting the possibility of changing their damage profile coming into the new expansion, but Affliction not only can change the damage profile, but they can change 2 of them. So what happened? Affliction Warlock in BFA had very strong single target damage, very strong burst in their cooldowns, Dark Glare and Misery. They have very good cleave and spread cleave with their dots, very good mobility with their portals, they have decent defensives, or rather sustain for themselves. What they are terrible at is that they have very bad AoE. They were limited by Seed of Corruption and some talents, Phantom Singularity or Vile Taint, too long of a cooldown, terrible sustain for AoE damage, no way after Seed of Corruption to continue your AoE, so terrible. And on top of that, too much ramp up. Yes, they have strong cleave, even 2, 3 or 4 targets, but it takes time to put up all the dots to maintain them. Mythic Plus would burn Warlocks behind because they took too long to actually start ramping up their damage. They were essentially ranged assassination rogue. So what changes in Shadowlands? Very few talent changes. You do get your trait back for Drain Life mega damage when you let it stack. You do get Demonic Circle baseline for Howl of Terror in your crowd control row, and then you lose Shadow Embrace because it becomes baseline cooked into your Shadow Bolt or Drain Soul, and instead you get Dark Caller, which is very strong because it reduces your Dark Glare to have a 2-minute cooldown, the same as your Misery. So now you can always pair them up, since you're losing your Vision of Perfection and several discounts from BFA. Now the biggest changes coming to Affliction are primarily 2 of them. First one is the fact that Unstable Affliction is no longer your spender or single target. Unstable Affliction no longer costs soul shards, it no longer gives you 10% extra damage, and it can no longer be stacked up to 5 times on the same target. Instead, it's simply a DOT that you get to cast on targets, and it's going to refund 1 soul shard if the target dies with it. The change following this is that you get a new spender. You have Seed of Corruption for purely AoE, and now you have all-purpose Malefic Rapture. Malefic Rapture is going to do AoE damage to all targets affected by your DOTs, increased the more DOTs you have on the target. Now this is already much better than before, but it's going to get better with Covenants and Legendaries. Covenants. Corintite is a very strong raid boss single target Covenant. The fact that it resets the cooldown if the target doesn't die means you can have basically 100% uptime on a single target boss fight, and this is a dot which counts towards your Malefic Rapture scaling, and it gets extended by your Dark Glare as well. Impending Catastrophe is the exact opposite. Impending Catastrophe has the good utility of spreading random curses to the enemies, but the more important one is that it's going to spread a DOT to all enemies. This DOT is also going to count to Malefic Rapture, and it's AoE. 1-minute cooldown, very handy in Mythic Plus for extra burst damage. Cold Rot is more like a cheese. You can put it together with your Inevitable Demise talent to do an even stronger Drain Life. And lastly, Decimating Bolt. As I mentioned, 2 different damage profiles could arise from this, where Affliction Warlock becomes much stronger. One is AoE and the other is Execute. The fact that Drain Soul already deals 100% more damage to targets below 20% health can now be paired with Decimating Bolt. Decimating Bolt is going to buff your next 3 Shadow Bolts and Drain Souls by 200% baseline. During Execute phase for Drain Soul, this is already 300% baseline damage, which is massive Execute damage. This then gets carried over onto your legendaries. You still have your Warlock class legendary to reduce your big cooldown, but what's more important is that you get something like Malefic Wrath. Malefic Wrath is going to make your spender, Malefic Rapture, increases the damage of your Drained Soul by 25%, which can stack up to 75. So now this is going to synergize with your Decimating Bolt to do upwards of 375% more damage. Extremely strong. Wrath of Consumption is going to help you in Mythic Plus even more. It's going to give you stacking DOTs as long as targets around you with Agony keep dying. Sacrolash Dark Strike, this was already a pretty strong Mythic Plus back from Legion, increasing the corruption damage flat out. And then Perpetual Agony of the Ajakir is more soul shell generation with your Agony. All in all, I think Affliction Warlock has improved tremendously coming into Shadowlands compared to BFA, mostly because of their damage profile. You do now have a clear path towards doing execute damage, which you didn't have before. Before you just had stable single target. Now you can be specialized in execute and AoE. You now have multiple ways to buff up your AoE massively. You can have your Ventir Covenant to spread a DOT instantly on all targets. You can put down Vile Taint to instantly spread a second dot to all targets. You can use Seed of Corruption to instantly spread corruption to all targets, and now you have immediately in 3 GCDs you have 3 DOTs on all targets that you can now expand with Malefic Rapture, doing massive AoE damage. Their survivability, their mobility, and their strength in single target has remained the same, if not slightly improved, if you pick the Covenants and Legendaries that allow you to, and I personally hated the Unstable Affliction spam playstyle, so I'm very happy with the changes that Affliction has gone through in the beta so far. Now on to BM Hunter. So what was BM Hunter like in BFA? BM Hunter had very high consistent damage. They had a few spells where they were laughably under-tuned and getting outscaled by everything around BOD. But since then they have scaled much better. They have went on to be much better. On top of the high damage, they can do it while moving and never being interrupted. Their damage uptime is extremely high, and they also get, one of the easiest free AoE cleave damage with Beast Cleave. It requires basically zero setup. All you have to do is just remember to click multi-shot and then you're done. Remember to reapply Barbershot, which is your entire identity as a spec, to get a free stomp from your pet, so you're set. The weakness is the pet AI is still retarded. You're still sort of pigeonholed in never taking Animal Companion or Dire Beast because they are stupid as hell. You have weak burst, both DPS and AoE. By the end of the expansion, it looked like BM Hunter had burst by simply clicking multi-shot and letting Beast Cleave and Stomp deal massive amount of damage, but it will not be the case at the start of an expansion. And also they constantly need uptime on the target because they need to constantly have Barbshot up to nearly double the damage of their pet. Now, coming into Shadowlands, they have gotten a few new things similar to all the other hunters. They have gotten, I'm sure all hunters are happy, they have gotten Hunter's Mark back, which is, the Dispel from their pet utility has been put into Tranquilizing Shot. They have gotten Scare Beast back, and now they've gotten Kill Shot for Execute. Kill Shot is currently pretty much useless. It's just a GCD you can use if you can spare it, but it's only useful for Marksmanship Hunter, since Marksmanship Hunter actually has a talent that can empower Kill Shot, and their mastery actually increases the damage of their shot, including Kill Shot, which makes it much stronger. When it comes to talent changes, BM Hunter basically only had one change. Bloodshed was put into their last row. Bloodshed is essentially a condensed version of Aspect of the Beast, extra stronger cooldowns. If you consider Bestial Wrath can eventually go down to be a 30-35 second cooldown, they can only follow it up with Aspect of the Wild. And Aspect of the Wild is rather weak. It's just focus region for your pet and 10% crit chance. It's weak. Hunter's legendaries are not that impressive. After, the Soulforge Ember Trap legendary has been mega nerfed. It's still okay for AoE, but it's not really what BM Hunter needs. Dire Command gives Kill Command a chance to spawn a Dire Beast. Kapla gives you cooldown reduction on your Kill Command when you use Barb Shot. These two are not particularly strong. This one, Flame Mocha's Cobra Sting, has a chance to make your next Kill Command consume no focus, and Rella Stalker's Piercing Fangs gives you 30% more crit damage to your pet inside your Bestial Wrath window. Again, this is so far quite easily the strongest legendary. It compounds on your burst window, which is all you need. More burst within your Bestial Wrath window. When it comes to Covenants that can help you with this, you have Resonating Arrow, which is on a 1 minute cooldown. It's very good because it gives you 30% crit chance to all targets that get tagged by Resonating Arrow for 10 seconds, and Bestial Wrath lasts for 15, so you can get a pretty good uptime within your burst window. of 30% extra crit, which is very good. That Chakram right now is the best simply because it's the most overtuned. Either the other Covenants are undertuned or this one is overtuned. It just does a lot of damage, even though it doesn't really synergize with your kit. Wild Spirits is currently pretty weak for BM Hunter, mostly because the extra instances of damage extra that you can do within Wild Spirits do not get triggered by Beast Cleave and do not get triggered by DOTs like Barb Shot. So the amount of times you can proc this is too low. It doesn't make it very worth. And lastly, Flash Shot, as I mentioned, pretty useless for BM Hunter because they have no way to synergize with Kill Command, because they have no way to synergize with Kill Shot. Overall, BM Hunter has remained the same as they were in BFA. You know, they are extremely stable, like solid, consistent damage, never interrupted by movement. They can do damage at all times, both single target and cleave and AoE. They still have weaker burst DPS than other specs, but with all these tiny addition from the new talent to the Covenants that you can choose to the legendaries, you can actually get now a much more beefy cooldown window than before. So this is probably the most well-rounded of the Hunter specs. Again, it's difficult to judge marksmanship because it is so overtuned right now. But when it comes to BM, it's in a pretty safe and stable spot right now. So next we have Demonology Warlock. Similar to the other Warlocks, especially since we are covering Affliction in this video as well. Very few changes coming into the next expansion. Demonic Circle becomes baseline and Howl of Terror becomes your new talent. And that's it. When it comes to talent changes, your Demonic Calling now is going to reduce your Cold Red Stalker cast by an extra Soul Shard, making it completely free. This is ironically a bad change in the sense that the other two talents in the row are terrible. So this is going to be yet another case where a super strong talent is going to dominate a row for an entire expansion, looks like. And that's basically the only major change. Baseline spells, Demonic Tyrant is now going to generate 5 souls when you cast it, which is very good to help with your burst right off the bat, particularly due to the fact that Tyrant is actually a cast time ability, which is rather annoying for a burst cooldown. When it comes to Covenants, you do have 2 single target Covenants and 2 AoE Covenants. You have Scorpion Tide, which is not as strong as Affliction because it's a dot that you don't get any benefit from, but it does help you with going from pool to pool in Mythic Plus, being able to snipe a dying mob in an easy pool to gain full Soul Shards coming into the next one, as well as a slight help in bosses for single target because you can basically keep this up at all times against a boss. Decimating Bolt is another single target ability, help with execute, not as good as Affliction because Demonology does not have Drain Soul, so you cannot stack the execute damage of Drain Soul and Decimating Bolt together. When it comes to AoE, you have Soul Rot and Impending Catastrophe. Soul Rot is rather weak due to the fact that you do not have any synergy with Drain Life like you can with Affliction. Again, you can't empower your Drain Life, so this is rather weak as a Covenant for Demonology. And Impending Catastrophe, again, it's helpful. It's just on a 1 minute cooldown to spread to spread your curses and do some AoE damage. Again, it's not great, it's not amazing. When it comes to legendaries, you still have, like all the other Warlocks, cooldown reduction on your Demonic Tyrant per Soul Shard spent. You do have Grim Inquisitor Dread Calling, which is going to help you, especially later on in the expansion, with more haste. You will be able to generate way more damage on your next Cold Red Stalkers with the amount of casts of Endel Gul'dan. At the start of the expansion, it will be understandably weaker. Bale Spider Burning Core is pretty terrible due to the low damage of Demon Bolt in the first place. This would have been much more helpful if Demon Bolt increased the damage of your minions or gave you more soul shards or anything other than extra damage. Forces of the Orn Nightmare is another good help when it comes to soul shard generation. Chance to double cast Handle Gul'dan. And then lastly, the return of Implosive Potential. Haste stacking based on Imps exploded at 3 or more targets. Again, Mythic Plus, legendary. So the outlook of Demonology in Shadowlands is that in BFA they did have very good single target damage. They did have also very strong cleave and acceptable AoE. They still had good survivability on their own as well as very good mobility. They had problems when it came to cooldowns, when it came to AoE and burst in general because they require ramp up. They are unique in that sense. Their ramp up is not in the form of buffs or in the form of DOTs on the enemy, it's on the form of pets summoned out. So coming into Shadowlands, none of this really changes. You still have your strengths and your weaknesses that are similar to BFA. The complaints, I'm afraid, are still the same. You still don't have a proper interrupt and you still have a rather clunky setup of summoning. You have to, before you are even thinking about your big cooldown, the Tyrant, you have to summon Red Stalkers, you have to summon your Imps, you have to summon your Vile Fiend, and you have to summon your Felguard. That's going to be some 6 to 7 GCDs and like 9 seconds of setup, which is still rather annoying and very hard to pull off, especially Mythic Plus, which is still likely what is going to hold them back in very quick burst content like Mythic Plus. It takes quite a bit for them to start to get going. Overall though, I actually enjoyed Demonology. It played really smooth to me, given that I can understand that this is the start of the expansion, the stats are low, and it is bound to be slower than it will be. I actually enjoyed it. It does have its weaknesses, but its strengths are also very clear, and to me it's enjoyable. And to you, again, if you didn't enjoy it in BFA, then you're not gonna enjoy it in Shadowlands. And lastly we have Frost. Honestly, I had to struggle to choose which one of the specs to keep here and which one of the specs to put in my last video of the 3 black sheep specs that I consider really bad in terms of mechanics, spec identity, rotation, etc, etc. And the only reason why Frost is here is because it's not as bad as the other 2. So, what's going on with Frost? Frost Mage has very good single target damage, stable and consistent, very strong cleave, very high burst damage in 2 to 3 to 4 GCD windows, but they do lack very strong burst. They don't have single target burst, they don't have AoE burst, they have none of that, they have only Icy Veins, which is a joke. Other problems beyond that they are completely locked behind procs, and these procs have no type of bad luck protection, anything that can help you guarantee their procs or anything. You're still at the mercy of Winter's Chill and Brain Freeze, and partially Fingers of Frost. When it comes to changes, essentially nothing changes. You get Mirror Image baseline in exchange for Focus Magic on your talent row, which is terrible, because no mage wants to give away his DPS to someone else. When it comes to change talents or similar, you do get Alter Time back at the cost of having your Shimmer nerfed. No other major change beyond the fact that your Winter's Chill now apply 2 stacks instead of 1. This is to help with your Devil Trime of Flurry applying Winter's Chill. When you are too close to the target or too far away to the target, in BFA you had this constant problem where you couldn't use and consume 2 stacks of Winter's Chill, because Flurry was traveling too fast to the boss, either because he was too close or because he was too far away and being too quick to reach the boss before you had time to land another ability in between your Flurry. So now you have 2 stacks instead of 1 to help you with that. It's a bad solution, to be honest, but at least it helps. Beyond that, your Covenants are very disappointing as a Frost Mage. They're not that strong for Fire and Arcane, but for Frost Mage they are particularly bad. Deathborn for Necrolord is a pointless cooldown due to the fact that you already lack cooldown as a Frost Mage, so this is not going to help too much. 15 Power is also bad for Frost because, again, Frost has no cooldown, so the effect of reducing cooldowns with this Covenant is not that strong. Mirrors of Torment is not very strong. Very difficult to get value of this. I'm assuming this is strong for PvP, but for PvE it's weak. And lastly you have Radiant Spark, which is just flat, consistent, single target damage increase in all situations. When it comes to legendaries, they are pretty varied, but none of that changes the way you play, beyond maybe Slick Ice, which sort of encourages you to spam Frostbolt inside Icy Vein cooldown. Freezing Winds is an extra passive, handy cooldown reduction to your Frozen Orb. You have Cold Front, which is going to get you a free Frozen Orb every 15 Frostbolts. And then you have Glacial Fragments, which is a killer of Mythic Plus right now. Ice Lance is pretty overtuned in the beta, and this helps you do more AoE. Overall, the problems of Mage are still all there. Beyond the triggering problem with Winter's Chill, which has gotten a band-aid of getting an extra stack, you still have the problems that you are being a little bit cannibalized by talents, because in the first row, Lonely Winter will always be the most valuable because it will scale like crazy. There's nothing that scales with your elemental, but Lonely Winter scales with your spells, so that it's bound to just become overpowered over time. And Splitting Ice is the only talent to allow you to cleave, so it's always going to be used whenever you can cleave anything. On top of that, you still have problems with procs cannibalizing each other. Winter's Chill and Fingers of Frost can both be expended by Ice Lance at the same time, and there is still nothing to fix this, and this is pretty bad. Again, you're proc-based, back to Winter's Chill and Fingers of Frost. You need those procs to happen, and you have no bad luck protection, you have no way to help you, you have no Fire Mage style extra crit chance to your Fireball when it doesn't crit. There is like no help for you, and again, you miss cooldowns. Icy Veins is a joke of a cooldown, and you've gotten nothing new. And to finish, Mastery is still terrible, because Mastery is buffing your Frostbolt and buffing your Icicles, and it's not touching your Ice Lance, which means the deeper you go into the expansion, the more damage your Frostbolt will do, and the more damage constantly overcapping and constantly generating Icicles to hit the target passively over using Ice Lance is going to be stronger, and there is nothing that helps you counteract this in Shadowlands. So overall, if you enjoyed Frostmage before, go ahead, but If you're hoping for something to change, if you're hoping for, specifically if you loved Frost Mage but you wanted some of these annoying things to be fixed, I am sorry to say barely anything is actually getting fixed, unfortunately. And with this we close our last ranged DPS video, and we are now down to only 3 specs left. In this video we have seen 2 specs that have received some pretty positive changes, and possibly an addition to their damage profile when it comes to Affliction, and better AoE and Demonology, and slightly better AoE and single target, and then 2 specs that have received barely any changes, but it is fine for Beast Mastery because Beast Mastery was already functional before, whereas Frost was still filled with mechanical and rotational problems which are still there. What's coming next is going to be the shit show video about Survival, Fire Mage and Arcane Mage, so stay tuned for that, and then we will draw our conclusion about how the DPS specs are looking as a whole coming into Shadowlands. And see you guys next video. Or not. Do whatever you want, I don't really care.